It's quite unusual for me to put together an expert panel and start with slides of my own. And I don't know whether some of you in the room might have already seen this week, but I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read through.
Great.
Give me a sign when everyone's done. Yeah?
Swing back.
So I've been finding this hilarious ever since I found it a couple of weeks ago. And then 4 days ago, from a lady who's a partner at Bain Capital Ventures, AI is weird. The tech is maturing faster than the market knows what to do with it. Consumer AI in particular is in its awkward teenage years, increasingly capable, but still figuring out how to dress.
Sure.
So, as I'm sure you all know, AI is everywhere, but clarity is maybe a bit harder to find. So my name's Julia. I'm a director at Renovata & Co. I run our events program. I'm super delighted to have our expert panel today, and I'm going to hand over to them in just a moment. I think it's fair to say at Renovata, most conversations we have with product and tech leaders like you at the moment are around how do we make smart, strategic bets on AI without breaking anything, right? Without breaking the roadmap, the team, the trust of our customers that is really hard won. So what we're here to do tonight is to talk, I think, less about tooling and productivity and more about thinking. So more about strategy. How do we build strategy that's practical, commercial, that's technically robust? That is more than enough for me right now. I'm going to hand straight over to our fabulous panel, Michael, Sara, and Mounir, to introduce themselves, and I'd love you to share just a little insight or tension that you're seeing in AI strategy right now.
Cool, thank you. Very happy to be here. I'm Michael Smith. I'm the CEO of Sagittal AI, and we do automation for the software development lifecycle. So, for example, we do tickets from Jira into pull requests from GitHub, but we can also read and write from any of your tools like Jira, GitHub, Notion, Figma, Confluence, that kind of thing. And we try to kind of create an AI team member that is very complementary to your existing team and works with your tools and processes. So one thing that we're constantly running into is that a lot of the companies are really interested in playing with AI, but they don't really 100% know how to do that playing, right? They don't really have a structured way to approach this. So one thing that we talked about that I think all of us here want to kind of get an idea from is how many of you within your company on the engineering side have a plan for how to trial multiple different tools and do an evaluation between them. All right, already you guys, you're in the minority, but already congratulations. That's a tough thing to do because, as we'll see, there's not that much data out there on how to do that. And how many of you have budget to do that? All right, good, cool. And on the product side, how many people are approaching this from like an OKR or a plan level? Much smaller. And then how many of you are doing it with a budget that you think is meaningful at all? Okay, so most of the people who are doing it have some semblance of budget, but it is like, 20% of the engineering in this room who are already probably ahead of the curve, and 10% of product ahead of the curve. So yeah, no, that's great to know. Thank you.
I took a mental note of everyone who raised their hands. There's some networking.
Yeah.
And maybe we can do AI native versus AI enabled as well. So AI native companies sort of born in
Maybe cost defines.
Yeah, so
I don't know if I know.
Yeah, sort of born with AI as part of your stack and offering by default. And people who are sort of transforming are on the pathway. Okay, cool. That's useful. It's really nice to meet you all. I'm Sara. I'm the VP of product of a company called Prolific. We're a human data infrastructure company for training state-of-the-art ethical AI models. So I think as a differentiation from Mounir and Michael, we don't build AI of our own, but we help other people do it. We're a picks and shovels company. Slightly different perspective maybe. And I think an insight, maybe two little ones, in terms of observations on the industry. One is there's a lot of 0 to 1 lift happening.
a lot of people doing things for the first time with no playbook, and very little forecasting ability. So this is really, really unusual sort of from a product perspective as well, not to be able to tell very far into the future. And then the other one maybe is when it comes to the actual arms race, right? The piece around sort of what AI models do what and for what use case. I think we're in some cases where we're chasing local maxima and we're over optimizing against sort of slightly artificial criteria. When you think about sort of leaderboards and benchmarks, it feels like something that come and sort of shake us out of that moment. Yeah, just two little observations from my side. I don't know. I'll pass to Mounir.
Thanks, Sara.
I'm Mounir, Portia AI's CEO and co-founder. We came out of stealth about 2 months ago now, and we're an open source SDK for folks who are building their own AI agents in-house with a focus on predictability, auditability in the human-agent interface, and authentication. I took a mental note again of folks who raised their arm up. A couple of things. I'm curious how many people in the audience are currently in a setup where there's an aspiration to build agents in-house into your products and into your processes. Nice. I'm in roll, please. I would say that the corollary, this is exciting, but the corollary to that is when we start having those conversations, you get like a flood of ideas of places where you'd want to start. And very often that's where it creates inertia because there's like so many options and not sure where to begin. So that's also an interesting challenge we've been facing that's worth discussing with you tonight.
Great, thanks, Mounir. Loads to dig into. I want to say thank you to everyone in the room as well for submitting your questions in advance. What we did with that is sort of group them thematically. So we'll go through, in terms of format, a bit of a structured discussion now that hopefully encompasses quite a few of those themes. But we will make sure that we leave a decent time for Q&A at the end. I think the show of hands exercise just demonstrates the diversity of stages and experience in the room as well. So there'll be lots of time to ask questions. We'll start kind of zoomed out, right? So let's start in the real world about the question of, where is AI creating genuine value? How can we separate out the signal from the noise in terms of where we are in this hype cycle? And I'll just throw that open and go left to right.
Well, I guess I'll take a shot at that. And I think one thing that I'm struggling with a lot is the term vibe coding, which I think is, and I think when you get into an enterprise environment, that starts to become very silly. And AI is not done hyping itself yet. Oh my God. And I go on LinkedIn and it is a trash fire of people talking about how they were able to build something amazingly quickly. And then the next day it is, been taken down and it's horrible and it's impossible to maintain. Well, yeah, what did you think? Like 4 lines of text are going to actually get you a maintainable piece of software. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we're running into right now is that hype and the ability to be able to bring, what all of us up here are trying to work on, but like the control and the environment to control in an enterprise environment, and being able to understand what the metrics are that move things as opposed to look shiny in kind of like a single shot example where it looks great on LinkedIn but actually isn't very useful. I think separating that out was the hard thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Sara, I know that you talked a lot in our preparation about the danger of this kind of shining object syndrome, just AI bolt-ons rather than taking a decent, robust approach to problem solving. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually an AI maximalist. I'm really optimistic and positive and bullish on the moment. I'm not at all a skeptic, but I think I'm going to be a little bit pedantic and boring and talk to our product principles a little bit, right? Guys, we know this, right? You don't lob things at customers because you think they're kind of cool, right? Like I think the principles when it comes to traditional product development and AI product development are kind of the same. And I hate to give that boring answer, but you start with the customer need, you understand them deeply. What are their opportunities and what are their sort of what are your opportunities for pleasing and killing their pains and making them happy that they don't know about yet? and then you take a really thin and well-defined slice and you scope it well and you put your governance and guardrails around it, and that's how you do it. It doesn't change whether it's sort of traditional product development or AI. I think there's a real danger of, as Julia was saying, just lobbing sort of models at people. And actually, there's also a cost to it, not just from an inference perspective, but a usability cost, right? I'll give an example. I was debating whether or not to give a brand name in this example. I won't, right? Because I feel this is a really maligned company when it comes to product workflows, and I actually really like them in general. But I was using a piece of software today. I was writing a user story, as I do from time to time. It had a little AI sort of autocomplete on it that was looking for similar statements. So similar tickets. Okay, I've said it. Okay, you know what I'm talking about now. Similar tickets. And thanks, Mounir. And what I think I'm sure I was in some tiny experimental group, but I could not write my sentence because the UI was hanging so badly. There was this massive model trying to infer similarity behind it, and they broke in my user experience. Why? Has that actually started from a real need and been properly scoped and thought through? And I think that's what I'd encourage people to sort of apply here. Let's not let what we know get away from us. And I think just as a strategic point, and I'll hand over to Mounir, oh my gosh, where's my strategic point? I'll hand over to Mounir, and maybe I'll come back to the strategic point.
You may interrupt me at any time.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
I would say that I wanted to echo the point that Sara just made and sort of build on it a bit by saying that you kind of feel like people are trying to sometimes force AI and LLMs with obviously the stochasticity that comes with it onto processes that otherwise would do very well with more deterministic, just RPA type thing, right? And it doesn't make sense. So you sort of, the state of things today, what I would look for is processes that are either very human capital intensive and or very natural language processing heavy, right? So you talk about tickets, right? Trolling through tickets as natural language. And that requires some level of reasoning and autonomy, where it is useful to have an LLM do some of that thinking. There's some design things you can do with, we're one of them, obviously Sagittal is another, of tooling that allows you to build some level of determinism and control into that, obviously. But those are you have to have a problem that is shaped around those things for it to make sense to apply AI. It's a means to an end, it's not an end in and of itself. So the principles of defining a good product starting with the user problem does not change because there's a new technology. It's not the right way to think about it, unless what you're solving for is like memes on LinkedIn or something.
Mounir, can I stay with you for just a second, actually, because there was a big show of hands in the room in terms of people looking to build agents in-house. We were actually talking about this ourselves as a business this morning. What have you seen as working well, or indeed not working well, for businesses looking to go down that route?
Yeah, I mean, to my detriment from a book of business perspective, I would say that it really does not make sense to look to build your own AI agents unless it's either really integrated deep into your stack. For example, it's a customer-facing user-facing experience within your product, or you need a level of control, whether that's like data privacy, or some other complexity that precludes you from using a SaaS that is AI powered type thing. In those cases, obviously, it makes sense to build in-house. Other than that, you're probably better off finding, if you really wanted it to be an AI powered SaaS company to help you do that and get those gains. And generally speaking, that's exactly what we find. I mean, we're learning that the hard way, right? You knock on certain people's doors, and after a bit of a chat, they realize that you realize that, well, they don't really need to reinvent the wheel. There's a full stack solution that gives them that. Why would they go and build it all themselves?
Well, I think I would jump in on that a little bit, and I think if you're building AI, you need to kind of think of it as two different things. One is, are you using AI to do standard operations that lots of other companies are doing, and you're trying to make that more AI enabled. At which point, yeah, go buy a turnkey solution. Go find a vendor who can do that in a much more creative manner. But if you're trying to use your own data for your own product, like that is a different beast, then you need to kind of actually dig in and you need to really understand what it is that your company does that's unique. And if I build a little bit on what Sara said, I think that there's an analogy here to changing over from an analog to a digital. But I think it's even stronger as we move to AI, which is I think you need to go back to first principles. When you look at the people who adopted digital, they screwed up when they adopted digital only in one place, but they really got their multiplicative advances when they accepted digital across the workflow in their company. And the same thing's true with AI. There's so many opportunities, especially since, like you say, it can reason and it can redefine your workflows. It can change the way your product feels. I would almost say back all the way up to service design, redefine how your company addresses your customers' needs, and say, what would happen if we put AI throughout all of it? How would it break the entirety of the thing? Your example was a particular, from where I'm sitting, like especially with what we're building, it's a naive example of someone saying, okay, in this narrow space here, we need to sprinkle some AI, and that will make things better. And the answer is like, no, that's like saying, oh, if we digitize just the accounting department, everything's gonna be great. And you're like, that's like a tenth of the capacity that you'll be able to bring as if you digitized the whole thing. And the same thing's true with AI.
If I may, I've remembered. So the point actually is really relevant to both Mounir and Michael's. It's a little bit philosophical, and so bear with me, right? So I think this is Prolific's viewpoint and mine also, which is that we're about to become superhuman. This isn't about automating away jobs, and it's not about automating away human contribution. It's about evolving the ways that we interface with the world and work. So I think that's the approach I like to take when I think about this, right? What is the thing I can do to delight my customer that makes them feel like a superhero, right? And I think those magic moments are really there are many ways in which this is a force multiplier, and the prevalence of magic moments when people are interfacing with AI systems is not like anything I've ever seen in my product development career. And there's also ways it goes off the rail that are really shocking, right? So everything is extremes. But yeah, just to bring the customer into the room a little bit, like, let's think about giving them their superhero cape, right?
That's amazing. Bringing the customer into the room actually is a pretty decent segue to our next kind of area that we wanted to talk about, right? Because I think there is this tension between the magic, but also, as you've all just said, needing to keep your eye on the prize in terms of first principles, in terms of strong, robust working practices that aren't just AI related, right? So I think a lot of the questions that came through from the audience were around, from a customer viewpoint, how do we build it? How do we build something that, how do we create a good roadmap? What does best practice look like? So I think from the sort of, what does good look like, there's a question around, yes, the how, right? I don't know who wants to jump in there first.
So I would say that the users we've spoken to and worked with who've had the most success at A, pushing the envelope with AI, and B, getting stakeholders on board within the company are folks who started with the highest return, lowest risk use cases. Highest return in that they are the three criteria I mentioned earlier. Reasoning is useful, natural language processing is high, and they're human intensive. A good example is, I think someone in the audience does that and only that for a living in their company. KYC, for example, or vendor onboarding. You can imagine other things like data collection across multiple vendors in a supply chain, say for carbon data, as an example. These are all very human intensive and natural language intensive things, and they involve things like data collection and preparing information for a human to review. So you have massive efficiency gains, but if the thing makes some shit up, makes some stuff up, It's
So there's an ad in this board.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe we could edit that out. Well, it doesn't break anything, if you see what I mean, right? And normally, if you've designed that well, the claims of your agent across the steps that it's taken are referenced to sources, etc. And so, the downside of in your, I don't know, 99% reliability system, that 1% downside is pretty low. And so they start there because you're seeing efficiency gain. You start getting a ton of FOMO across the organization. Well, we want to build stuff ourselves. Or in your, if you have multiple products or multiple features because it's worked in one, you start stretching the envelope. And that's when you start bringing in, I don't know, the relevant, whether it's an SDK or another tool, something that has the right human-to-agent interfaces to give you the controls and guardrails you need. And you're able to stretch it further. But you have to start there, sort of tactically, from a getting your feet wet perspective. If that makes sense.
If I can jump in there, I feel like you're, you said something there I want to call out, which I think is very non-intuitive, which is the ability to kind of interface between an AI and a human. And that goes back a little bit to that service design that I was talking about. I actually feel like the thing that is probably the hardest thing to get right when you're trying to reinvent a workflow is trying to figure out how you pass back and forth to an AI richly and be able to give it enough context so that it can get some work done, and then you know when the right interrupt cycle is that you can actually then process it as a human being. And bringing that AI as close to the human almost requires the rewrite of that workflow rather than kind of like doing an isolated individual thing. So you kind of almost need to rethink it like it's a digital workflow, it's an AI workflow, but you've got to bring the AI up and across all as much context as possible. Otherwise, it's just going to, make stuff up.
So keep the humans very much as a roadmap is what I'm hearing.
Well, and even think. I like your superpower analogy too. So if you were to give them superpower, or I like to think of like a human in a giant mecha suit, right? If that's your customer and the AI is doing all the heavy lifting, but they're in control, what does that product feel like? And I feel like it's not like having a capacity to just lever one thing up better. It's actually being in a full, like they're fully in control and they're able to do it. So it's kind of a reinvention of it. We're kind of talking in very abstract terms. We can drill down if people have like want to call out specific things as well.
I can drill with a question I think Sara really wanted to speak to actually, which is how do you avoid POC purgatory, which I thought was a really interesting way of describing that mode when you're spinning your POCs and not really getting to fully implement.
Yeah, I think honestly that's probably been asked and answered already in the sense that it is a matter of looking for real value and thinking about it from first principles. I think we're, to an extent, a lot of the people in this room, I suspect, are victims of organizational design in this regard. And like if you're spun off into a little, innovation, group or incubator team or something, and you're told to implement AI, I think that's unlikely to yield like the right kinds of habits and the right kinds of culture shift. I do think starting from the customer is probably the way to go. And maybe to riff on these guys a little bit, Julia, I think we don't build AI products so much as sort of tooling for people who are building AI products. So the one thing I would say is just kind of reflecting on the moment as far as road mapping from a product perspective. It's really hard to stabilize roadmaps right now. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that pain, but you're not alone.
Shake hands to that, maybe.
Yeah. I think, I've always been anti-long horizon roadmaps for various reasons, but even like a 3-month roadmap right now, we're moving at the pace of white paper preprints, which I think is never, I think that's a new thing. So just to say, we've been talking earlier about how do you make bets when you have no data to draw on? So there's a lot of that as well, right? Like making a best attempt at something and then going and measuring. But yeah, I think as far as the proof of concept purgatory, it really is a case of thinking about it from, what is actually going to delight and kill the pain of this customer, and not from a sort of we've been spun off into a meeting room to figure this out for the business.
I will just add one point, going back to the meme thing I said earlier, the whole sort of death by 1,000 memes. a lot of the tooling is evolving, right? But there were a lot of blind spots when it comes to going from proof of concept, small scale to production scale. And those things emerge every day. It's everything from context windows flooding because it doesn't handle agent memory well, all the way to not having a proper observability on evaluation framework with observability to maintain a certain level of reliability with the reasoning, the outcomes, the tool calls that your LLMs are constructing. And I think what happens is a lot of companies in this sort of gold rush manage to build a POC with a partner, but then that partner hasn't equipped them with the right technology to then go to production and deal with these challenges. Not out of malice, just because it's all so new, right? So it's just also a learning curve.
I'm curious to know, and I'm sure you have, whether any of you have a good story about having had to kill part of the roadmap and how that was navigated.
Like part of our own roadmap.
Yes.
So we should open up the kimono.
Everyone ready?
I should go at that point. I'm happy to. If anyone can go. So you may have heard of this little thing called MCP. Show of I mean, it's a good workout. So we were thinking, we're an SDK, right? And there's a lot of value in saying, well, you get this SDK if you like it with, one API key, one config option. Here's a whole bunch of tools that are in our cloud that you can start using. And we're going ahead and building them. There's entire businesses that do nothing but that. And then MCP comes along, which was initially pioneered by Anthropic. Normally, standards stick when they come from academia or grassroots, and this was neither. But they've done a phenomenal job with it, and it is a great standard, and so it's picked up. And very quickly, writing your own tools is like the dumbest thing you could do for things that are like public apps that are available. I don't know, Linear, GitHub. Why would you write your own tool? It makes no sense. And so that completely changed the landscape. And how long did it take? Like 3 months, and about 30,000 memes later, it became a standard. So that was an interesting challenge, because then you have to think about how you adapt your roadmap to that, which I won't break the news yet. But anyways.
I guess I was just going to add, to what it is that you're bringing a lot of times on this is the kind of the workflow management, and we're finding the same thing. And the one thing that MCP doesn't save you from is the ability to kind of to understand the thing that you're trying to do with the tool. And so I feel like you can't give up how it is you're going to add the value to the customer, and if it is encoding that usage of that tool, then MCP can help you with the connecting, but it can't actually, you don't really want to outsource your business logic to the latent space of some reasoning model. That's not going to be good enough. So I have no idea what lowering a roadmap looks like. Mine just keeps I think it squares itself every day.
The shape of roadmap.
Yeah. So it's more just consistent and vicious prioritization than it is pulling. It's more just figuring out which parts of it I can bet later.
Iteration.
I think my first reaction was I kill parts of my roadmap every day, and it's just if I do it Tuesday, right? But I think maybe the biggest roadmap shock we had, so obviously we're in the business of injecting human oversight and human training at various stages in the AI development lifecycle. And I think the biggest roadmap shock recently was the sort of shift from the gold rush on reinforcement learning by human feedback to the gold rush on reinforcement learning, which was really sort of popularized via the DeepSeek launch, which has moved humans around in the process. And I'm a massive believer that they never ever get fully factored out, but they're moving around, right? When generative AI first hit the stage, it was generating massive data sets, like the very, very boring stuff of massive data sets. And then it moved towards sort of fine tuning and reinforcement learning. And now it's maybe more so on the oversight and safety and guardrailing and the stuff that Mounir was talking about, making sure the thing doesn't go crazy on production. So that was the biggest roadmap shock recently, but we've had to encode it into our DNA that, you're going to come into work and everything you thought was true is no longer true.
On the changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's we wanted to talk about what does good look like? Where are the strong use cases? Where's the value? We wanted to talk a little bit about roadmaps, but there are a number of different topics that came up frequently. Trust is one of them, and I know, back to you, Sara, that you've had a lot of experience with trust and oversight frameworks, and I think there'll probably be a whole bunch of questions in the room around this topic as well. We could probably spend the rest of the session on it. So let's move there for a second.
Start on this thread. I think there are two interpretations of this. One is sort of how do you get buy-in on AI products from your internal collaborators and stakeholders or your customer. And then there's also sort of how do you trust that the product is doing the right thing. I think that maybe they have different answers, but to start with the latter, I think the key thing to get across to a bunch of sort of product development professionals is the way that these things fail is different in nature to the way that traditional products fail. And I think the way we test them and the way we observe them is different. There's some transference, but I think, for those of us who's been through sort of a compliance audit and built sort of security practices in and sort of observability into our processes under that kind of pressure, I think that sort of like moving safety and guardrails left. I always forget which one left to. Yeah, moving it left into the earlier stages of your process. As you think about, okay, we recently, so we don't, as I say, we don't build AI systems, but we incorporated we did our chatbot. Everyone, thank you for the congratulations. But we did our chatbot integration. Thanks. So it started speaking to people in languages depending on I think like their geolocation. Just decided to change languages. So that kind of thing is not something isn't typical test case that you would test for in a test plan, right? So I think these are new skills we have to develop in terms of sort of trusting the thing to do the right thing.
Would that have counted as one of your magic moments, Sara?
I really don't think so, Julia. I was scared, a little bit scary.
Okay. Anything from Michael and Mounir on this subject of trust? I'm not meaning to kind of, think that it's a huge subject, dance over it really quickly, but I think we wanted to come on to talk a little bit about teams and team structures and trust within that format as well. And I think in with this idea of trust is this idea of risk. So where do you guys see the biggest risk within these strategies or within your internal teams?
Well, I guess I could probably speak a little bit to how we more manage the risk, because the risk here is the non-determinism of the LLMs and the fact that it can go off the rails and do something unexpected. I think the control lies in the fact that actually these things are amazing if you focus them down. They're really bad if you ask them to do something big and broad, or they'll make stuff up. So the way I like to think about it is, if you separate what it is you're trying to do from ground, it'll draw a line from that. An LLM will make it up. If you talk about what was the example here, like Frenchman living in your drain, it will draw that line. It will figure out how to connect the dots, and it will make something up. So the trick is to kind of break down the problem into a controllable, measurable workflow, and then actually kind of trust each component and test it well. And if you aren't getting reliability, like you knew exactly how to solve that problem, right? You break it down and then you kind of figure out how you're going to test it. If you are feeling like the LLM is out of control, you do have the capacity to break down that problem. You probably know how it is that you would break down that, and then you can bring that control in. And this is why, I'm a huge fan in an enterprise environment of a controlled workflow-based capacity to kind of get stuff done. Don't outsource the top level of this to your Devons or your GPTs. Instead, know what it is you're trying to do, control that, and then you can measure it, then you can test it, then you can create regression tests, then you can do all these test-driven development mechanisms.
Can I draw a really quick line back to the way we know to write specs and stories for product development traditionally, right? Like small, testable, independent. This is, again, not new, right? It's the same thing. You reduce the risk by decomposing it.
Yeah, you stole my thunder. Basically, the way we handle it is you have your sort of planning layer of your workflow, and then you have the execution of every step, and you have evaluations that are constantly running at the planning level and then at the individual execution level. And even within the execution, you have checks on whether you've constructed the tool arguments correctly and whether some of it may have been hallucinated, checks on whether the way the output's been summarized is congruent with the task that was given, and so on and so forth. So, and then on top of that, you factor in, you bring determinism into the equation to the level that you need it, depending on your regulatory risk or otherwise, with things like human agent interfaces, execution hooks in your workflow, to make sure the human is involved. I do, however, wonder if in 5 years' time all of this is going to be a bit of a moot point, because LLMs will be at a point where you've got the 5 nines of reliability, or however many nines. But anyways.
I was going to come to a bit of crystal ball gazing towards the end, actually. Just being mindful of time, I'm glad we managed to get to the conversation about how do you measure success with non-deterministic outputs. And if there are any other metrics that you've been finding effective, then what might they be?
Sorry, I'm just jumping in, just because we literally talked about this and have a first version of this today for our design partner. It's this concept of outcome-based evaluations. A lot of the evaluations in the LLM world right now, a lot of it concerns itself with an LLM as a judge, sort of trying to figure out whether a tool call was constructed correctly or whether a natural language answer to something was correct. But we're obviously pushing the boundaries with agentic workflows where the output can deterministically be evaluated as yay or nay. And with outcome-based, specifically for a KYC example, with outcome-based evals, you essentially are assessing whether the agent gave you the right determination on somebody being a true positive or a false positive, false negative, etc. during onboarding. And it literally starts becoming about when we say 2 + 3, are you giving me 5 or making stuff up? Which I think is where evals will go, and this should be where they go, because is it delivering the actual behavior you wanted?
Maybe just to add to that, I think I don't know that we've really grappled yet with how these things how these things live on live systems for many, many years. I think it's not the favorite topic of a traditional product manager, right? You want to create the functional requirement and see the customer really enjoy using the feature. But I think observability, explainability, transparency, and sort of safety and oversight become really, really interesting innovation spaces now. I don't know if you both think these things will be solved by sort of commoditized and solved by vendors, or whether they will sort of be developed in-house more so, but that's an area of real interest. So how do you make sure the thing doesn't start, 3 months in, it's drifted, now it's saying things you would never want to say to your customer, right? So it's interesting.
I was just going to say, I don't think we have an answer to that, like you said, yet. I think we're we've been noticing, GPT-4.1 drifting away, and and we'll just say, okay, great, we need to change it. We noticed that it's messing up a little bit more in this particular manner, so we need to change our classifier, or we need to change some kind of prompting just a little bit. But yeah, that's and even in there, even in the tooling that you use to try to figure out whether something's right or wrong, we're probably a little bit older generation than you are, because we started 6 months before you built, which it's like the stuff is moving so quickly. So
we mentioned drift, hallucinations, privacy. There's a question that I really wanted to come to, which we sort of might have answered already, but I'd like to bring it up. Apart from hallucinations, privacy issues, etc., how will overdependence on AI lead to overdependence on AI lead to a decline in fundamental core skills? I have an answer to that, which I brought up in a meeting this morning, which is that I think our critical faculties need to improve. We don't need to delegate that. Over to you guys.
Yeah, I have a very strong opinion on this, which is that humans are really good at the empathy and the context and the probe, sense, and respond There's this wonderful framework that I just love quoting, which is called the Cynefin framework, which breaks things into like simple, complex, complicated, and human beings really can handle the complex stuff. So now I'm deviating in the philosophical realm, but the human beings really understand the sensitivity. We kind of almost can't express some of the context that we already intrinsically know, and we have a lived experience. The LLMs do not know when they're making stuff up that is real or imaginary, and they just don't understand that context. And so we have to really be careful on, like, we know where we're supposed to be, and we know that we can delegate a lot more of the automated tasks to it. However, I think, therefore, that fluency of being able to communicate with the LLM and pass things back and forth becomes even more important, because we are the ultimate arbiters of it doing the right thing or not. The way I like to say it is, right now, probably almost all software engineers are spending 10 times more time writing code than reading code. And that has to flip 180 degrees to they read 10 times more code than write. That's 100x difference, not 10x difference. And so that is a huge shift. And that's going to be true of like almost everything that we're doing. But that actually means that what they're doing is spending more of the time evaluating outputs and understanding it in context than actually spending their time doing the mechanical work.
Mounir is deep in thought at this point. And then we'll move to questions from the floor.
Yes, I think so. So I think this might actually be my back in my day moment, and I'm trying not to be that person, but it's really hard, right? And also, at Prolific, we care a lot about sort of human authenticity, so we grapple in this space quite a lot. It's important that people who come to us for human data are getting real human data that's done attentively and with full effort, and not with the help of ChatGPT. Otherwise, you end up with this sort of like regression where bad AI data is being used to train novel AI, right? So, I think that Michael's exactly right. I think that the push is towards specialization, so human knowledge becoming more specialized. But I do think that as far as sort of managing high-performing teams and the cultural element, I think there's a little bit of sort of guarding of that sort of culture of. I think we need to know it to be able to not know it, and I am a little worried about that. And also trying to draw useful analogies, such as that of a scientific calculator. Like, nobody ever says to anyone else, I can't believe you're using a scientific calculator to calculate, like, the sign of this, whatever, this curve, right? So I do wonder to what extent these things will feel like that in the future. As far as the way we interface with AI systems, I think there are new verbs for us, things like tend, shepherd, teach, instruct, and that's really interesting, right?
You've succinctly covered it. I won't ramble too much. The only thing I'll add is, like, we'll just basically, if you think about levels of abstraction, we started with hardwiring. We were talking just earlier. My aunt used to tell me about how she used to put these massive cartridges in like optical computers back in the day. But like, this is where we started, and then you went into like hexadecimal assembly code, and then into compiled languages, and now you're going to natural language. But it's more that you have to get really good at handling a higher level of abstraction and a higher level of throughput of information. But you can't do that if you don't have systems thinking, critical thinking, in some of those basics. My working hypothesis, based just on like backwards perspective, is that, so as in looking backwards, not backwards perspective, is that the forms of education that we will follow will build us up to or build the future set of developers and builders up to that point, to the same way we were not expected to plug cartridges in when I was doing computer engineering, even though I'm very old. I did C++, just betrayed my age a little bit. But yeah.
It feels...
If I can jump in on that, I actually think there's been a long-standing problem with software engineering for the last like 10, 15 years. It's gotten worse and worse, where the syntax of the language is what you're taught, you're taught software, you're not taught the engineering part of that. And I think that's analogous to almost everything that we have to, that where AI is going to take the mechanical and the engineering, whatever that form that engineering is going to remain with the humans.
Thank you. Feels like we've come to a bit of a full circle moment in terms of zooming back out again to the big picture. So we'll open up the floor to questions. Joey, would you come and take the other mic, please? So please, just hands in the air, like, but Joey and I will run around with mics.
Sure.
Oh, I'm going to stop off here.
Thank you so much. Loved everything you said. In fact, I'm sure many of us that have said that before. It felt really unsatisfying, just because I think the complexities of these things, and day in and day out, we're kind of in the weeds of it. Do you feel like we have any idea what we're talking about? Because for me, it feels like we're that blinky, haven't invented the GUI phase. We're all sitting in a garage. We're at the computer club talking about more RAM on the thing. Like, I don't. Do you think 2 or 3 years looks anything like what we're talking about today, or is it completely unknown?
You've just asked my crystal ball gazing question, so thank you.
It's so good. That's incredibly good question to ask. We were just talking about this over drinks earlier. Honestly, it's just so early, right? And everyone whose job it is to make opinions can't do it quite yet. But I think we can tell. You know those kind of like thought experiments where like the ant can kind of tell it's on the surface of a balloon, but it doesn't know exactly how many dimensions. Like we can kind of by looking at the negative space understand where we are in the innovation curve and where sort of what kind of moment we're in, but I don't think we have any idea what this looks like. I don't have any idea what this looks like in 3 years.
That said, I think there are some things that don't change that we've talked about, like the fact that you still have to worry about the metrics for your user, not in a localized fashion, but in like a more global fashion. It is another technology that you apply to your customer's problem, and your design of, and your opinion and your taste and your understanding of the market that you're in is not going to be outsourced to an LLM. But the capacity to deliver against it is something that you could probably hold less tight now. So I think there's things that we know to be less true and more true now, and I think we need to get together in these kinds of fashions and try to tease out which ones remain true and which ones are still kind of malleable. But yeah, I think there are ways forward, or the way I like to think about it is that in n-dimensional space, there are some things that you know to be true, and there's still a lot movement, and we just have to be conscious of what is changing and what is not changing.
That is a superb question. Guys, I'm going to try and race through as many questions as I can in the next 10 minutes, so forgive me.
All right, there were some good discussions about trying to narrow things horizontally, vertically, so you're not blowing the ocean, and the example Sara gave about the widget hanging in our favorite ticketing system. To what extent is time the really underrated aspect of this? Like, we're so obsessed with instant gratification. We're trying to, like, I'm talking to an AI agent on the phone, and they're keeping up with me. I'm trying to write a ticket, and they're ahead of me. Whereas, for me, the value, if you look at how asynchronous things have worked to develop better BI, why we're not saying, like, overnight, this thing came up with 20 other ideas and plans for you to review each morning. Because what an LM can do in, like, 3 hours is amazing, and we're trying to optimize for what they can do in, like, 30 seconds, and kind of missing the forest for the trees. Whereas, like, we struggle to keep reprioritizing, give set of roadmaps. To me, the value of what these things can do is more every morning waking up and this thing is saying, here's everything I thought of that you didn't have the brain power because you were sleeping. And here's, how to potentially tweak it rather than I want the widget to look like I'm talking to a human being in real time.
Oh, completely. So, like, that's definitely a magic moment, right? Has anyone used the deep research class? And it's absolutely that is a goosebumps moment. For that system to crawl the internet, cite all its sources, and give you a massive report on any topic within a few minutes.
Sources too.
Sources. Oh my God, yeah.
The file's good in it.
Yeah, and also sort of like
I tell you the element.
exactly that. It's a kind of like it's the mixture of the magic moment of the speed and the explainability, which is something that Edge AI is still struggling with a little bit. I think so. So latency and natural, sort of that natural feel. There's a word for it actually for like lack of latency. When I don't know. If anyone knows, but yeah, that sort of like immediacy of response is just there's a texture to it that feels very human. I think that's a big one. Yeah, I think, yes, that's one of them. I think there are many, many things that feed into that sort of, for me, like as an example, I haven't coded in Python in 20 years, and I did that last weekend because I was being assisted, and I was just like, shit, like, that's something I can do again. So yeah, it's an amazing feeling. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on sort of that sense of sort of immediacy as being.
Well, and I think this goes back to your question, which is I think there are some things that we know and don't know. For example, I agree with you entirely that deep research is amazing, so much so that sometimes I've used it and then looked at the report and went like, oh my God, I pressed the wrong button. I do not want a 20-page answer on that one. And I didn't realize that until I started to read that 20-page answer. And I'm still learning how to even try to figure out whether I need immediacy or longevity. And I think that's actually an interesting product question for every answer we're trying to give to you humans. Is urgency the important thing, or is like depth the important thing? And I think that's where our judgment call on our domain and what we build is not going to change.
Okay, we have one from the back here.
Yeah, so this is a question I think Michael spoke about, reinventing the workflow between humans and AI. And if you bring the customer perspective into it, I'm thinking, how do you do that? Like, almost feel like it's a chicken and egg problem. Like, until you reinvent the workflow, you haven't built trust. And once you've actually put it out there, would you actually tell users, these parts of the workflow are actually AI powered? Because that might actually lead customers to not trust it even more. So how do you kind of bridge that balance between building trust and being transparent?
I think it really depends on what it is that they are trying to build workflows for, and where there's this tension between the autonomy and the risk of things going off the rail, right? And it's there's I don't think there's a universal answer. I'm not going to pretend like I have one, but what we see with users is the higher the risk appetite, and the more there's desire for autonomy, the more they're willing to, let's call it, delegate to the AI and have guardrails from an evaluations perspective. And wherever you have something like creating a refund is where you would say, no, I want a deterministic execution hook, where give me a rationale, but I don't care how confident you are, Mr. AI, like I want to confirm with a human. And you will still see gains there because the AI has, I don't know, in this particular case, done the legwork of comparing the request to your very long refund policy and presented you with a summary of that.
And I'll double down on your confusion there and say, like, I agree with you entirely. And then all of us are going to learn how to use AI a little bit better, which means the whole thing's going to move a little bit as well. So even the way we interface with AI today and what we trust and what we don't trust is going to shift over time. And I have no idea how that's going to necessarily move.
I'm coming. Hold on.
Hi. We have a motto at work, which is bet on the model. And what that basically means is when we're designing the product, bet ahead to where you expect the model intelligence to be some period in the future. And what I'd say we've found over the last year and a half is that we have consistently not bet far enough ahead. And I was just wondering whether you have any sort of tactics for how to think about that and how to build that into your product strategy and into your roadmap.
I go back to that framework of what I think humans are good at and what AI is not good at, or what AI is good at. And I think AI consistently goes farther and farther towards the complicated and complex. But it's not so good with judgment calls. And it's, unless you're tuning it in that regard, you're going to have to, like Mounir was saying, you're going to have to surface it in the right places to be able to kick off to a human being in the right places. So I think you're right. You always should bet that that's going to improve. But what's interesting is my co-founder and I, when we first started looking at this stuff, like the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, the models seem to be growing into that which we saw GPT-3 doing. And that's expanding, but I don't think it's not. And that is actually it's growing into all of those capabilities. but it's not actually a total leap beyond that yet. I don't know if that's going to come. I don't think anybody can really predict that. So we're kind of betting it's not going to change its flavor, but it's going to get better at what it's good at.
Thank you, Michael.
I would just very quickly. What I would add is, and again, this is all speculation, is that there is when you speak to people at Mistral, OpenAI, Anthropic, there's more and more of a differentiating, creating LLMs that will be very, very good at complex reasoning, LLMs that will be very good at tool calling, and ones that will be very good at deep research, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those will potentially, the direction is they vertically specialize and become very reliable at those types of tasks. But if I'm honest, the best remedy is just flexibility and being ready to flip your roadmap, because something that you're betting your entire business model on might and probably will change if you're building AI-powered products.
We have time for a couple more. Bear with.
Hi, I'd like to ask how you're considering about versioning the AI. So in traditional computer science, you check in your changes, you run a regression test suite, you see the delta. How are we thinking about changes to the AI and not just kind of checking the delta between A and B, the drift over time?
It's a good question.
If I understand your question correctly, it goes back to what you're touching on. The crux of it has to do with the stochasticity of the AI. And the interesting thing is that, for us as an example, you have this thing. I'm trying to bring it to life, so I don't mean to try and sell, but we have this thing called a planning agent. It's planning what you want to do with your workflow. And you run it, you're happy with it, you get it to your 99 point something reliability on ground truth, it's doing it correctly. Then some new FM model comes out and it's oh, it doesn't like your prompt, and you have to go and change it a little bit to bring that back. It is unpredictable, and it's even more unpredictable when you go across vendors. The answer we have to that is we have daily evals that run, hundreds of them across every single thing. Wherever there is a prompt, there's hundreds of evals running at any point in time across models to check that it never drops below a threshold, and we literally have it up on a screen. So it's all hands on deck if anything happens. And whenever a new model comes out, we're very thorough with making sure that, or any new feature we add, we have anytime you add some new feature, we added execution hooks, you immediately check that feature in, and literally as part of what happens at GitHub is all the evals are triggered. If there's a drop, the PO is rejected, and we have to figure out what happened.
I think we have time for two. We'll go for three more.
Thank you for the session today. I'm at an AI native company, and I find that talking to people who work in tech, I'm able to have really good technical and conversations. And I think, building an AI native platform or using AI quite heavily, there's lots of interesting challenges. We touched on some of those today. But one of the things that actually fear most is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn.
Oh, LinkedIn.
Yes, LinkedIn. In the sense of the amount of my energy that I actually spend, I'm CTO, so the amount of my energy that I actually spend either explaining or moving away from a problem is actually a bigger fear for me than actually building and utilizing tech. So I just wondered whether you have a thought on that.
Do you mean in terms of reputation if something were to go wrong?
Well, no, sorry. What I mean is that the amount of either misinformation or the amount of overhype, and in some cases by people who are frankly not qualified to speak on a topic. And I find that really frustrating.
Wait, there are authorities in the world that are not qualified? I mean, that's actually, sorry, it's endemic of it's worse in general in society, but it's really bad in AI. And politics.
I mean, other than sort of complete solidarity with you on this point, I think we've hit the hype bubble in technology at the same time as the sort of explosion of mindless human ephemera, right? And I think Honestly, I don't read it. I think there's stuff that is useful. I'm really interested in people's early impressions when models come out. Because I think to the earlier conversation about them exceeding our expectations, there's actually a weird thing happening where they're actually sometimes the generalist skills of the models are degrading. There's something really interesting there. So they'll get rid of the specialized, but then they'll lose some of the generalist capabilities. So I'm interested in people's sort of felt reactions to how the latest models are doing, so the usability side of them. But yeah, I would just not. I mean, I try not to look at it.
It's gross. But
It's disgusting.
It's gross, says Mounir. I think I think we all share your sentiments, actually. Maybe something to discuss afterwards. I'm going to go for one more question, but I'd love it if everyone can stick around afterwards and take advantage of being able to speak to our panel. One there, and then one to Ian, and then we're...
Excellent. So we've spoken about trust quite a bit, but one of the things that we haven't really spoken about is the notion of common knowledge versus correct knowledge. I'm not talking about revisionism. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But for instance, for Michael, one of the things we see, and we're starting to see more and more with AI assistants, is common patterns that may have security holes, but that keep being reinforced. And because the AI agent suggests it, we go with it. But this is something we're seeing not just with coding, but across. What guardrails do you suggest for those?
Well, the way that we handle it in our product is we attempt to encourage our users to figure out how they want their system to behave and to help the system understand how to do this. And what's great is you can speak to it in natural language and tell it that there are certain standards you wish to enforce and ways you wish to do it. A perfect example of this is when you're doing coding agents, a lot of people will say, oh, well, it learns from your code base. How good's your code base? Like, is that actually what you want to learn from? Or would you rather have it set if you're the VP of engineering, wouldn't you rather set higher standards than what you currently have in your code base? And maybe that's what you want to have. And that's actually not that hard for AIs to do that. They will take examples really, really well. So I think when you're trying to get a product to do that, I would say that's a much better pattern than, say, trying to replicate stuff that's already out there.
If I may, that's such an exciting question for me, I think, because we part of what we're trying to do is make sure that AI systems are trained on representative human knowledge from around the world. So we have projects where we are trying to sample a proportionate distribution of the world's population on various topics, for example. The problem is the more representative you are, the more you're encoding all the bad shit that humans think. And I actually don't know. I wonder if we are headed towards sort of a utopianism of human knowledge in these systems, which feels kind of bad because that's not representative of humanism, right? Like humans, warts and all, right? Racism and irrational behavior and all of that. So I actually just to kind of flag that I have no idea how we're going to solve that, but it's not just a problem in the use case you described. It's very much a general area.
Guys, I wish we had more time, but I'm just going to go to Ian for the last question, and then we'll wrap.
Okay, very quickly. Thanks for the CBS, sir. It's been fantastic. So just an observation, you've been talking from the perspective of building on frontier models, foundational providers, and there's a whole set of assumptions being into that. And I suspect many people in the room are building on the same assumptions. So slightly left field question, there's a lot of price discovery going on. Inference is probably subsidized. How do you see that playing out? How do you build a business model basically based on someone else's benevolence?
Business model? We're starting.
Well, I think we found that actually if we're doing much more curated workflow, we're actually doing a lot more deterministic programming and much more classic stuff. So the more workflow, the more deterministic you get, actually, and the more narrow you use the LLM, the more inexpensive it gets. And you can have it focused down. I think also the farther out you try to solve the biggest user problem with the largest impact of the end-to-end metrics from the user, gives you more place to play where you can spend dollars, if not tens of dollars, to solve a problem instead of worrying about like the 100 millisecond that might not be correct. That inference has to be cheap. but you can spend a little bit more money when you've got a little more time. That said, the inference costs have just seem to be plummeting, and we've only just started seeing people applying hardware specific for inferences. Like we're right now playing around with Grok with the Q, not with the K, for very high speed, very low cost inference.
So I'm not a hardware specialist at all, but obviously we all follow the news and so on and so forth. And there was, if you like podcasts, there was a very interesting debate about this in the All In podcast recently, between the sort of tactical usage of GPUs versus TPUs and entire data centers architecture changing. And supposedly different sources of energy being brought in, I am at least hopeful that the cost of inference will continue to go down over time, which makes these business models viable, because otherwise, forget you and me and our startups, it's the foundational models themselves who are going to basically bleed out. There's only so much they can take on their P&L, right? And in their early days, the cost per unit being query, was much, much higher than it is today for them. This is just anecdotal from people who work in those circles, right? So it's an assumption, maybe it's optimistic, but there's data to suggest that it's reasonable that this will continue to go down. Otherwise, it's a problem that the entire foundation breaks, not just you and me. So.
Guys, I think we're going to wrap it up there. I was trying to marshal some concluding thoughts, but I think we've covered so much. Thank you for your insights. I'd like to finish, though, with maybe just a quick 10-second hot take around, a question that everyone in the room should be taking away with them for further inquiry. And then I would encourage you all to stick around and come and ask more questions of the panel and meet each other as well. Any hot takes to finish?
Questions that are maybe in the spirit of not having the answers, but having a lot of questions. What does the human-machine interface look like here, right? Like, what does that evolution look like? There's a lot of surface area in that question.
My question would be, what would your product and what would the world look like if AI had 100% reliability?
And I guess I'm gonna do a hot take off of yours and say, what can you do with 80% reliability and being able to reinvent the workflow around humans? So if you manage to get that really, really good right now with an 80% reliability, are you going to be able to kind of make something pretty interesting?
Guys, thank you so much. I'm going to halt us there and let everyone get to the bar. Big round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much.